Okay, ladies and gentlemen, many of you have asked, many of you have wanted me to talk about this. So today I'm going to answer the $1,000,000 question, which is weed. That's not exactly a question, but many of you have asked me about my opinion on weed, marijuana, the ganja, the devil's lettuce, so to speak. Now, the video is titled accurately. This video is not going to be why you shouldn't smoke weed. It is simply why I don't smoke weed. Normally, when somebody has a critical opinion of weed, all the stoners come out in droves and be like, bro, you just got to try it. You've never tried it before. Let me tell you this, I've not only tried it, but I was the stoner's stoner. I was the wake and bake all day, every day. I would sometimes literally wake up at 5 a.m. just to take a piss, hit a one-hitter, and then go back to sleep because going back to sleep high was better than going back to sleep sober. I would smoke in nearly every single setting. It wasn't necessarily just like a social thing or something that I only did after work or on the weekends. Anytime, any place, anywhere. Now, for context, I also wasn't one of those guys that smoked it in high school or like during my teenage years. I really only started once my anxiety problem started becoming a real problem. I was starting to have panic attacks. I was starting to have some real problems with my anxiety, and I didn't want to take some prescription medication that I was handed multiple times. So instead, I decided, okay, when I get anxious, I'm just going to smoke a little bit of weed. I hadn't even tried it at the time, but I heard that it was this miracle thing for anxiety and whatnot. So I decided I'd smoke a little bit of weed when I was getting panicky, when I was starting to freak out, and that was it. Or so I thought. Nobody really likes to talk about the slippery slope of smoking weed because it always just starts out with, oh, I'm just going to do it with my friends. I'm just going to do it after work on Friday, on the weekends, only when I'm anxious. And then once you start to enjoy the feeling of being high, food tastes better, jokes are funnier, shows are better, everything's better when you're high on weed. Then it goes from, I'm only going to smoke when I'm anxious to now I'm going to smoke when I don't really have anything to do. Then it goes from that to I'm only going to smoke when I'm home. And then at that point, you've made such a habit of being high so frequently that you don't feel normal unless you are high. This is exactly how people go from being completely normal human beings to the stoner. And I don't just mean people who smoke weed a lot. I mean people whose entire personality is weed. And I understand this is not the case for everybody. I do know people that can do it just socially. I know people that are very disciplined about doing it just after work or just on the weekends. But in my experience, that is not the majority of people. The majority of people fall into this slippery slope. And I was absolutely one of those people. I mean, it got to the point where I was meeting complete strangers in Florida, people that I had never met before, don't know a thing about, but a friend of a friend said that they sold weed. And so I'd go meet them, not knowing anything about them or what they sold or whether it was good stuff or whether it was laced with anything. And I'd just buy it. Not only would I just buy it, but I would spend my very last dollar to buy it. I would take money out of my girlfriend at the time, now my wife, out of her purse to go buy the weed because I didn't have the money myself. The lengths that I was willing to go to fuel this dependency were absolutely ridiculous looking back. But at the time, I didn't see any problem with it. And the irony of it is I started using it for anxiety, and it got to the point where I was smoking so much weed so frequently that I was getting paranoid and my anxiety was getting worse. So it went from something that I used to solve a very specific problem to something that not only did not fix the problem, but exacerbated that existing problem. It just wasn't something that was serving me. It was not something that was benefiting my life apart from the fact that things were more fun when I smoked. And for the next 2 years, that's just what it became. It became the thing that I did to feel good, to escape my reality and run from my problems and enjoy things that otherwise were boring. Because the interesting thing about weed is, like I said, it makes everything more fun, even things that aren't generally that fun. When your life is in shambles and everything's chaotic and you're lacking direction and you're completely lost as an individual and you don't have anything in order, you don't have your money right, you don't have any relationships going well. When you smoke weed, none of that matters. Your life can completely be in the gutter, and then you can smoke weed and then feel better about your life. And that's really what it was for me. I was completely broke. My relationship was falling apart. I was 3 months behind on my car payment. I was completely in debt, like $40,000, something ridiculous. And nothing was good. But as long as I was able to get high, as long as I was able to not feel it, then everything was fine in my eyes. Eventually, I started to come around. I started to realize that these things were actual problems, that I needed to get my money up. I needed to fix my relationships. I needed to become a better individual. And so I did start to fix those things. I did start to get in better shape. I did start to, make more money. I did start to do things better, but I was still smoking weed. This was something that I struggled to overcome. It was something that I struggled to quit. I would try to backpedal it and go back to saying, okay, I'm only going to do it when I feel anxious. I'm only going to do it on the weekends. I'm only going to do it after work. While weed is not physically addictive, it is definitely habit forming. And the habit of smoking was just so hard to break. I would try putting my stash in a different place or in a place that was less accessible to me so I wouldn't be as inclined to do it, or I would have to make multiple decisions in order to do that so I would have time to change my mind and stay on the path. None of that worked. So in late 2020, I believe, I took all my weed, I took all the stuff that I had, which was like a bunch of flour and like some carts and stuff, and only weed people know what I'm talking about. I drove it all the way up to Orlando to the guy that sold it to me. I said, take all of it back. I don't want any of my money back. I'm quitting this. And if I contact you to buy more, don't let me buy more. And I just came to terms with the fact that I am not the type of person that can have that around, have that at my disposal all the time, and not have it become a problem. I have a very addictive personality. I like to do things the way I like to do them. I go all the way. I don't take any half measures. I am hardcore about the things that I choose to do. So yeah, I just accepted the fact that I can't have it around me. So I made it inaccessible to me. I didn't know a single other person that sold weed. So at this point, it was pretty clear that I was done. And just like anything else that's hard to quit, for the first 2 weeks, it was pretty hard. Like I craved it a lot. I wanted to smoke weed. I wanted to get high. But honestly, like after those 2 weeks, I was like, I didn't even really need this. Like, why was I so worked up about this? Like my life goes back to normal. Life goes on. And then you can't even imagine what it feels like to get high. Like at this point, 2 years later, I completely forget what it's even like. And since that day when I quit, I have smoked maybe like once or twice when I went up north to hang out with my friends. And it's not something that I'm completely against. Like I treat weed in my mind the way that I treat alcohol. Like I don't drink that often. I don't drink alone. I don't drink and drive. I don't drink at work. To me, they're very similar, even though alcohol definitely is worse. Like there's a lot of physical consequences to drinking alcohol that don't exist with weed. I would definitely prefer a society where weed was treated more like alcohol than alcohol is treated like alcohol. I'm not some weed abolitionist and think that you can't smoke it ever. Because if I go back to Boston and hang out with my friends and they're passing a joint around, I'm not going to not hit it. Like whatever, who cares? But when weed or any other vice infiltrates your life and causes problems and stops you from doing things that are productive and stops you from being the best version of yourself and growing and learning and everything that's important, then it's a problem. Now I'm not a big fan of weed. And I would say the very same thing for alcohol. If you drink socially, if you hang out with your friends and have a drink or two or get hammered even, like who cares? But if alcohol or video games or TV shows or whatever it may be starts to impede on your life, now you have a problem. And that's just what weed became for me. And I know so many people that are like, well, Joe Rogan smokes weed. Well, Joe Rogan's worth $200 million. Joe Rogan gets his shit done and then smokes weed. How much are you doing? How much have you progressed? When you start making huge advancements in your life, when you start accomplishing big things and then you smoke weed on top of that, I'm not mad at you. But to sit there and point the finger at Joe Rogan and say, well, Joe Rogan smokes weed, this successful person smokes weed. Okay, then why aren't you Joe Rogan? So yeah, that's my take and my history with weed. I might not have the most popular opinion about it, but it is what my opinion is. So take it or leave it.